Friendly reminder, this is a horror film so terrifying that it would never be made in mainland China. People have literally died of fright. The demons in the cave, the bizarre shamanic exorcisms, and the ancient rituals are not just about exorcism, but also about the preservation of folk traditions. The story begins with Chris, an American journalist, who sneaks into a cave called La Poca to write an article about tribal culture. According to the locals, this is a place steeped in curses. They warned her not to go in, but Chris wouldn't believe in superstition. She wandered inside for a while, noticing nothing unusual. But as she was about to leave, a ghostly figure flashed before her eyes. By the time Chris came to her senses, she realized she had already been tied up. As the man yanked the sack off her head, Chris saw that she'd been locked in a secret room. Then, James questioned her about why she had gone to the La Boca cave. Chris immediately told the truth, adding that she knew a girl from the village, Miranda. Sure enough, as soon as James heard Miranda's name, he left the room. It was only then that Chris noticed the walls of the secret room were covered with all sorts of strange drawings. But just then, a bizarre person with paint smeared all over his face silently appeared at the doorway. He tiptoed over to Chris, gently cupped her face, then glanced warily toward the corner of the room, as if something terrifying was lurking there. He then turned and left, telling James, who was standing guard outside, that Chris had been possessed by a demon. Upon hearing this, James' expression changed instantly, and he immediately walked in. Ignoring Chris's pleas for mercy, they forcibly poured a bucket of goat's milk down his throat. After that, without saying a word, they left again. Chris still had no idea why he was being imprisoned, but soon he dreamed of being attacked by a demon in a cave. When he woke up, he could still hear the demon's whispers in his ears. Terrified, Chris quickly covered his ears and didn't dare lift his head for a long time. But before long, he heard footsteps in the room again. This gave Chris quite a scare, but when he looked up, he realized it was just a rooster in the room, so he didn't think much of it. Early the next morning, Harvey brought Miranda here. In Chris's eyes, Miranda was his savior at that moment. But what he didn't expect was that not only did Miranda not plead for him, she even scolded him for ignoring warnings and going to the Raboka cave on his own. So now, he could only stay here obediently and let the witch perform an exorcism on him.
Go into more detail.
It turns out all kinds of demons are sealed inside La Poca cave, so anyone who's been there will be possessed. Chris doesn't believe this nonsense. Miranda, however, is convinced it's true, saying once the wizard drives the demon out, they'll naturally let him go. But Chris has no intention of just waiting. He first asks Harvey to return his backpack. With Miranda's help, Harvey finally gives the backpack back to its rightful owner. But what Chris didn't expect was that as soon as he took the backpack, he immediately called his colleagues, telling them to come rescue him as soon as possible. Seeing this, Harvey angrily confiscated the backpack again. That night, Chris noticed a little boy peeking at him through the door. Seeing this, Chris felt a glimmer of hope and hurriedly asked the boy to help him contact the outside world, but the boy didn't say a word and just ran off. Deeply disappointed, Chris had no choice but to go to bed. But when he woke up, he found himself tied up hand and foot, unable to move, with red and white paint smeared all over his body. And that shaman, who looked even scarier than a demon, was right beside him casting a spell. Panicked, Chris immediately asked Miranda if this was the exorcism ritual she had mentioned, but Miranda didn't answer, she just reminded him to stay focused. She told him that if he saw the demon, he must remember to tell the shaman. But Chris, who didn't believe in ghosts or spirits, was sure he wouldn't see any demon. Unexpectedly, when the shaman heard this, he gave Chris a sinister smile and told him in a very certain tone that he definitely would see it. So, after all the preparations were done, the shaman. Harvey and the others left, leaving Chris alone in the secret room. Realizing he couldn't break free from the ropes, Chris simply lay there, deciding to just let things be and see what tricks they were going to pull. But just then, a rustling sound suddenly came from the window. Chris turned his head and saw a black snake crawling in through the window. Right after that, another black snake appeared at a different window, and soon both snakes were crawling onto him almost at the same time. Chris screamed for help in terror. Fortunately, at the critical moment, Harvey appeared in time and caught both snakes with a sack, while the witch kept stroking the red dye on her belly, then left a handprint on the wall's double snake pattern. Clearly, although the demon hadn't shown itself, the witch had already found some clues. As night fell, the sheet covering Chris was suddenly yanked to the floor by something, and right after that, the secret room's door slammed shut. At that moment, Chris also noticed that a pool of red blood began to appear on the sheet. He hurriedly lifted the sheet to look, only to find that the rooster from before had now turned into a bloody dead chicken. Seeing this, the witch warned Chris that the demon was about to appear. When Chris still couldn't believe that demons existed in the world, Miranda helped him borrow the witch's exorcism manual so he could learn more about demons. However, late at night, as a bored Chris flipped through the exorcism manual, suddenly, one of the candles went out. Chris didn't think much of it, assuming it was blown out by the fan, so he picked up another candle. Strangely, that candle also went out, so he had no choice but to turn off the fan. But before long, yet another candle mysteriously went out. Then, all the candles on the wall went out one after another. Luckily, Chris still had a lighter in his hand, but as he lit the lighter and walked toward the corner, a cold gust of wind suddenly blew from behind him out of nowhere. In an instant, the flame was snuffed out, startling Chris once again. At this point, the shaman also realized that the demon had already begun to possess him. So, the next afternoon, they tied Chris to a bed again, while the shaman stood by his side, chanting incantations non-stop. But after a short while, he suddenly lifted Chris's shirt and forcefully shoved his hand into Chris's abdomen. Even stranger, the shaman then pulled out a wriggling, live snake from inside him, but because the snake's body was so slippery. Even with both the shaman and Harvey working together, the snake still managed to slip back into Chris's stomach. This showed that the exorcism had failed once again. But in Chris's eyes, this shaman with his face covered in paint was even scarier than the demon itself. On the third night, Chris happened to see a mouse slip into the secret room, scurrying around in the corner. But the next second, it was smashed into a pulp by a giant hand, and in the blink of an eye, that pile of flesh appeared in his hand. Chris was so terrified that he screamed on the spot. When Harvey heard the scream and rushed to the secret room to check what was happening, he was caught off guard as Chris suddenly attacked him, strangling him with an iron chain until he passed out. Then, Chris grabbed the key, unlocked the shackles on his feet, and picked up a lantern, ready to escape this hellish place. But as soon as he opened the door to the outside, he was blocked by an invisible barrier. When Chris crouched down to take a closer look, he found that the doorway was covered in salt. According to the shaman's notes, Chris knew that salt had the power to restrain demons, but even so, he still tried to push the salt aside, but the next second, his body started retching uncontrollably, and before long, he vomited up a long string of hair. Witnessing this, Chris was so frightened that he hurriedly hid to the side. Now, he finally believed that he really was possessed by a demon. So, from that night on, Chris no longer resisted the shaman's exorcism and apologized to Harvey for his reckless behavior. And whenever he had time, he would study the shaman's exorcism notes. Before long, he discovered that the notes described a method that could force the demon inside him to reveal itself, though it was extremely dangerous. Harvey did not recommend that Chris try it, but eager to get rid of the demon as soon as possible, Chris ultimately decided to take the risk. Seeing this, the shaman agreed and began painting symbols on Chris's body. He was told to lie on the ground with his arms outstretched. As the shaman hammered a nail into a wooden ritual tool, a red mark instantly appeared on Chris's palm, as if an invisible nail was piercing through his hand. After the shaman hammered 3 more nails and played a mysterious instrument, Chris's soul suddenly appeared inside the Lapoka cave. He continued to walk deeper into the cave. Chris once again saw the little boy who had been lingering at the entrance of the secret room. He hurriedly chased after him, only to see himself lying there unconscious. At that moment, a huge demon appeared behind Chris and even slapped him. Chris instantly woke up from the ritual, but what was shocking was that a bloody wound had appeared on his right eye. Before Chris even had time to feel the pain, he saw the little boy standing at the doorway, suddenly revealing sharp teeth that no human could possibly have. Then, in the blink of an eye, he vanished again. Harvey wanted to chase after him, but found that no matter what he did, the cell door wouldn't open. At that moment, a strange wind suddenly whipped up inside the secret room, followed by a waft of pink smoke drifting in. The demon Chris had just seen finally revealed itself.
That's right. It's over.
Seeing that he couldn't drive away the demon, the wizard suddenly turned to look at Harvey, his expression full of reluctance. But then, as if making up his mind, he abruptly turned around and began chanting a spell. The demon's heart instantly appeared before their eyes. Without hesitation, the wizard grabbed the heart and squeezed it hard, ultimately perishing together with the demon. The next morning, Chris was finally able to leave the secret room, and Harvey buried the wizard. After that, he left the village and never returned. However, no one could have imagined that the demon had not actually been destroyed. Miranda's arm had been accidentally injured on the night of the exorcism, and now the wound was not only failing to heal, but was actually getting worse. Even more disturbingly, she began to hear the demon's whispers in her ears. Realizing what was happening, Miranda hurriedly locked herself in the secret room. Seeing this, Chris immediately guessed that the demon had possessed Miranda. But now, the wizard was already dead, and Harvey had also left. He really couldn't think of anyone else who could stand up to the demon. But just then, Chris suddenly saw a shadow pass by the door. When he went out to take a look, he saw the ghost of the wizard guiding him to retrieve the exorcism artifact. In that instant, Chris understood that the wizard wanted him to inherit his mantle. In order to save his friend, Chris didn't refuse. Instead, he smeared the red and white paint on his face. Then he went to the secret room and applied the other part of the paint to Miranda's neck. But at that moment, Miranda suddenly lost her senses and lunged at Chris. Clearly, the demon had already lost much of its power by now, otherwise it wouldn't have been unable to withstand even a little attack from the paint. After Chris pushed Miranda away, he immediately picked up a hammer and drove an iron nail into the artifact. Miranda let out a shrill scream, and a red mark appeared on her palm. Seeing that it worked, Chris immediately began reciting the exorcism incantation from the notebook. Then he drove in a second iron nail. But this time, just as he was chanting the incantation, the demon actually made Miranda's body do a handstand, all the while begging him to stop. Watching his friend being tormented like this, Chris couldn't bear it and chose to give up. Sure enough, after Miranda's body lay back down on the ground, the two iron nails. The nails also fell off the ritual tool. But at that moment, the demon made Miranda stand up, trying to attack Chris. Unexpectedly, it coughed up puffs of smoke and then lost its strength, crawling out of Miranda's body. Seeing this, Chris hugged his friend, but he realized the demon was there. All the candles in the secret room went out. Chris untied the bandage on his head, revealing one of his eyes that had gone blind. And this I could see through everything. But just as he was searching for the demon's whereabouts, the demon suddenly appeared and dragged Miranda away. Seeing this, Chris hurriedly chased after them, continuously playing the ritual instrument. The severely injured demon couldn't withstand this power and had no choice but to hide again. The two girls were about to leave, but Chris thought for a moment this might be their only chance to destroy the demon. He shouldn't give up. So he decisively returned to the secret room and threw away all the ritual instruments on him, provoking the demon. The demon, clearly unaware of human cunning, was indeed enraged and revealed its true form. But before it could make its next move, Chris thrust his hand into its chest and pulled out its heart. Seeing this, Miranda quickly picked up the knife from the ground and stabbed it hard into the demon's heart, completely turning it to ashes. From that moment on, Chris became the village's new shaman, and Miranda became his assistant. But not long after, another outsider broke into the La Boca cave. The villagers hurriedly brought him to the secret room, and to everyone's surprise, he actually knew Chris. It turned out he was the colleague who had received Chris's call for help earlier, and had come specifically to rescue him. Unfortunately, he didn't know that anyone who entered the La Boca cave would be possessed by the many demons hidden inside. Chris, however, said he would personally perform the exorcism for him.
I have to warn you. We're not good at this. But we're going to get better.
That's the end of the film. The Old Ways may be a low-budget horror movie, but compared to American priests who only use the Bible for exorcisms, Mexican shamans clearly bring a richer sense of folklore. What's more remarkable is that, besides horror elements, the film also weaves in fatalism. The protagonist, who once didn't believe in ghosts or gods, ultimately chooses exorcism with conviction, thanks to the shaman's self-sacrificial rescue. You don't have to believe in ghosts and spirits, but local folk customs should never be offended. Respecting others is a way of making things easier for yourself. Alright, that's all for today's story. I'm Shangju, see you next time.